take that.
Oh. Okay, what about sound? Are we good? Are we good?
Yes.
Your microphone is
Yeah, it
falling.
fell off.
Okay.
Oops, still
So
there.
where'd it go? It's probably in your shirt somewhere. I apologize for that from the last people.
Is that all right? The
Is
sound?
that all right?
It is fantastic.
All right.
Can you talk about your passion for limited equity co-ops?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I am a person who really appreciate limited equity housing cooperatives, and primarily because it's the opportunity for people to purchase and own their property collectively together. And I think the more that people work together to help each other, then the better all of us can be, especially those of us who don't have a lot of money.
What was the first co-op that you organized?
Well, actually, the first cooperative that I organized was one where I live, called back in the mid-'80s, called the L Street Cooperative. And what happened, you know, in the District of Columbia, we have what we call the first right to purchase. And that means that tenants, when the owner wants to sell a property, the tenants who are living there has the first opportunity to purchase that property. So it's like being able to preserve your housing. And at one point in the district had monies to help tenants purchase their properties. And so I was living in downtown DC, 9th and L Street, near where the new convention center is presently. And the owner of the property where I lived had a vision of how the district would look with all this development coming. So he had that vision. So he wanted to get all the low-income people out of the building where I lived, and they were all low-income people were being pushed, were being threatened with being pushed and displaced from downtown DC. And what he didn't see was that there were some folks in the building where I live who were going to fight back. And so that's what we did. We organized a tenant association, we organized people in the community, and we exerted our right to stay there. And so that was the first battle. And as a result, it was definitely a fight. You know, we had to demonstrate around the owner's business in K Street and in Alexandria, because this owner was very disrespectful to the DC law and did a whole lot of things like wouldn't provide us with heat, would lock the doors, the entrance and the exit doors, to try to intimidate people and put us out and force us out. But he didn't realize that there were people who knew our rights and would fight back and not stand up for that. And so we had demonstration at his home in DuPont Circle, at his businesses on K Street, and eventually we won the right to get ownership of the building, and then we purchased the building and converted it to a limited equity cooperative. So that was my first limited equity cooperative that I worked with.
The tactics that your landlord used to try to get rid of people, have you seen those from other landlords? Is that common?
Yeah, the tactic that the landlord, where the owner of the building where I live used to try to force us out, is really kind of common in the city. In fact, the owners of a lot of these buildings where there's development going and they want the low-income people out so that they can convert it to high-end property, where they've used all kind of illegal intimidation tactics. We've had to even, when I say we, I mean resident tenants in the city, and you know DC is like a tenant city, like 60% of the people who live in DC are tenants. So consequently, as a result of that, we have some real good tenant protection laws in the city. So what we've had to do as a result of all those laws and tenants fighting back in the city, we've had to organize to close certain loopholes that landlords have used or created over the years to try to force people out. So some of the tactics that the landlord where I was living in L Street, downtown DC, was using, we've been able to get rid of those and change the law and make the law more favorable to tenants. We've been able to do that, yet and still, we still have challenges.
Where did the right to first purchase come from? That was
Yeah.
rule?
Now, it's been around a while, sometime in the mid-70s, they created the first right to purchase, and it's been built on since then. And it's been built on in terms of making it more effective, even though it's been challenged consistently, constantly, all the time, even today. It's challenged by owners who don't want tenants to have that right. Because what happens usually, owners, especially speculators, they want to be able to sell the property quickly, or they want to flip it, or they want to buy it, and they already have a partner or somebody who they want to sell it to, and so they want to do that quick, fast, and in a hurry so they can make a lot of profit and forget about the tenants who live there and the rights we have, and that our housing would be lost, and we would be without a place to live. And so the use of this law, first right to purchase, has been a real great advantage for our residents, for residents in the District of Columbia, both low-income residents and higher-income residents, because there are a number of higher-end market rate cooperatives in DC where folks have been able to, the tenants have been able to purchase their property and create market rate cooperatives as a result of that law. And there are a lot of jurisdictions where people look to DC, say, oh, you have this this law, how does it work? We need to do this in our locality as well. In fact, I was working with some residents, I think maybe about 3 years ago, 08, 06, 07, sometime around there, where we were trying to get some national legislation that would require Section 8 owner, if the owner wants to get out of the Section 8 business, then they would have to give the tenants the first right to purchase. So that was something we tried on the national level. It failed. And we tried it on the district level as well. Because in DC, the law is if the owner wants to sell, then they have to get a tenants the first right to purchase. But it was like 06 when we had this real serious crisis of owners opting out of the Section 8 contracts. And so as a result of owners getting out of the Section 8 contract after they had been there, 20 years or so, then that put a lot of residents who were getting no subsidy at jeopardy. And so we were able to get some of our legal assistance, some of our legal allies to propose legislation that would add opting out of the contract, the Section 8 business, to provide ownership opportunities for tenants. But we weren't able to get that passed. But that's something we're still working on both local levels and national levels.
Have you seen a lot of speculation recently?
I would say I haven't seen a lot lately. When I say lately, I mean like since the bubble in 08. I have not seen. There's some owners holding on to buildings and are forcing tenants out. Tenants are fighting back, but forcing tenants out so that they're thinking and hoping and probably doing something to try to bring it back to a buyer's market. But right this minute, there's not as much speculation as we used to see before 08.
And we don't have a speculation tax, right? something
No.
you'd like to see?
Yeah, haven't talked a whole lot about it. We haven't talked a whole lot about it, but actually, a speculation tax, yeah, that would be good if the idea or behind it is to force the owners to make those to make those housing livable, not just to board them up and hold on to them empty until the market change. Because we have a serious housing crisis in the District of Columbia. And so it's a problem to have housing just boarded up. So if there was a tax on those properties, to what they call it incentive, as an incentive to get the owners to develop housing, I would say yes. But
can you describe the housing crisis in the city?
sure. DC, right now we have housing that is affordable for people who make $30,000 and below. There's a serious waiting list. The waiting list for the District of Columbia Housing Authority right now is almost 40,000 people on the waiting list. It's 37,000, excuse me, 37,000, something like that. Excuse me, people on the waiting list for housing with the Housing Authority. This doesn't cover the waiting list for our shelters, people who are homeless without housing, period, and need housing. It doesn't cover, that number doesn't cover the families, the growing homelessness of families on a waiting list for shelters. And so right now the people who have housing, we have a large percentage of people with housing right now paying more than 30% of their income. And 30% of an income for housing has been defined as affordable. So regardless of what your income is, if you pay more than 30% of your income for housing, then housing and utilities, then you are you're a burden. Your housing cost is a burden. And so we have thousands, tens of thousands of people in the District of Columbia in that situation where they pay more than 50% of their income for housing. And we have a large number of people who pay 70 to 75% of their income for their housing. That for me is criminal. That for me is immoral, regardless of whatever religion it is. And it should not be, and it doesn't have to be. But that's how it is in DC. We saw about, I think it was like 06, there were like 50 to 60,000 people on the waiting list for public housing and for subsidized housing. And something happened. The Housing Authority, for some reason, was able to bring the number down to 20, 25,000 people, but without giving people housing. But the number was brought down. And this was like 06 and 07. And since that time, the number has risen again and is still rising. So it's a real serious housing situation. Is a real serious problem in this city.
Haven't we lost a lot of public housing?
We've lost a lot of public housing. We have about, I think it's like 8,000 units of public housing. And when we say public housing, that is housing that is owned and administered by the DC Housing Authority. So that in the 90s, in the early 2000s, we had like 11,000 units of public housing, but since then, right now, 2011, we only have about 8,000. So we've lost a lot of public housing, and we've lost it to a number of things. One is just plain or outright deterioration. We've lost it. And then others, we've lost it to what is called Hope 6. And Hope 6 is still there, a little bit of money there for Hope 6. But Hope 6 is a federal program that provides grant money to a housing authority to demolish deteriorated public housing and as an incentive to create quote-unquote mixed income communities. What happened over in, let's see, Hope 6 got started sometime in the 90s as well. It was created sometime in the 90s, Hope 6. We've had a number of Hope programs. Mr. Jack Kemp was like the leader of the Hope, and some have been helpful, but the Hope 6, which is about tearing down deteriorated public housing and creating quote-unquote mixed income communities, was in the early 2000s. It was called Hopeless 6, because what was happening, it wasn't, the ideal of Hope 6 was not what we were seeing in terms of the results. We were seeing, yes, speculators and developers being all excited because now they can get their hands on this property that was before public housing, and they could get their hands on that and create higher income property and get grants and get low interest loans from everywhere to build these housing. And so that's how we lost a lot of our units, from 11,000 to near 8,000 units of public housing. And those Hope 6 that public housing tenants around the country call Hopeless 6, and DC had the largest number of quote-unquote Hope 6 grants in any other jurisdiction in the country. And so we lost a lot of property that way on top of the deterioration.
I remember Ellen Wilson, wasn't that one?
Yeah, Ellen Wilson was a Hope 6 property. And what happened with Ellen Wilson public housing development, if you look at it today, 2011, you have maybe one or two low-income people. You had mostly moderate and higher income. It's a cooperative. For higher income people. That's what Ellen Wilson is. And the few low-income residents that stayed there, for the most part, have been moved out, have lost their housing. So you go look at Ellen Wilson today. You know, it is mostly high-income lawyers, people work for the government who makes a lot of money, who are living there.
And what about Arthur Capers Carrollsburg?
Arthur Capers Carrollsburg was, folks just few years ago, a couple of years, 24 months ago, started to move back in. That is, the public housing residents came back, because yes, they tore it down, moved folks out. It was a Hope 6 project, and they still have not completed rebuilding all of the public housing, because that was one of the properties where the residents fought really hard to get quote-unquote one-to-one replacement. They fought really hard. That was one of the group of tenants that fought really hard to get the one-to-one replacement. And even today, right now, they still haven't completed developing the public housing. Now the so-called mixed, the other higher income housing has been essentially completed and folks have moved in, but all of the public housing units have not been redeveloped.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's unfortunate.
Do you mind going back in time just for a minute? I wanted to see if
Okay.
you could talk about, did you found Wish?
No, I didn't found Wish. Wish was found in Washington. Wish is Washington Inner City Self-Help. Wish was founded in 1978 by a collection of religious groups coming together in the District of Columbia. That was before the Washington Interfaith Network that we have today. But so back during that time, folks saw that there was a serious housing crisis in 1978. There was a serious housing crisis here in the District of Columbia. So the faith-based, I think it might have been like 40 some faith institution came together to create Washington Inner City Self-Help. And the mission was to help folks, assist people in two things. One, developing their capacity to fight for their housing and to fight to hold on to the housing they had and to fight for more housing on the one hand. On the other hand, the mission was to have a nonprofit development arm to create housing as well. And so WISH came into existence, and it was around until 2003 is when it really went out of business. I came on staff in 1987 as a result of when I was out there trying to hold on to my housing with my other neighbors and other tenants. We went to WISH and said, WISH, because they had community organizers. We said, WISH, please come in and help us, teach us, help us learn how to fight for our rights and hold on to our housing. So as a result of my doing that, I was able to then go on staff and take what I had gained from fighting for my own housing to fighting for other housing. And so, and I was there until the end, until we had to close the doors and do our kind of praises to WISH for all its work. And as a result of WISH, we created a number of limited equity cooperatives. Actually, that got to be our, that got to be the key kind of development that we were involved in, limited equity. And you know, when you talk about housing cooperative, there are at least two forms. There is the market rate cooperatives, and then there's the limited equity. And the market rate cooperative is the kind of housing that you buy into. All of it is you buy into a corporation. The corporation owns the property, and then you buy shares in that corporation, which makes you a shareholder and part owner of that corporation. And then you, as a shareholder, then have all these rights. You have exclusive right to your property. You have the right to say who comes in and who are denied the opportunity to come in. In fact, there was a case some time ago in New York, because you know New York is like the center of cooperatives, and I remember reading where actually Richard Nixon tried to get a cooperative. They denied him a cooperative in New York, and they denied Share a cooperative because the cooperative owners say, well, if we let you in, then that's just going to bring all the media that we'll never have any peace, you know. And so what happened with a market rate is when you sell your share, when you sell your share in that corporation with a market rate, like the Watergate Cooperative is a market rate cooperative. The Chasselton on 16th Street is a market rate cooperative. You sell your share, so you sell it for whatever somebody will pay you for it. So they're like
at the sell it for a profit.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the cooperative in the Watergate, the cooperative over there near where the Watergate is in Northwest, they have some shares that are $1 million plus dollars. But a limited equity cooperative works in the way that you purchase share, the corporation owns the property, which is great for low-income people, moderate-income people, because it's the corporation that goes to the bank to get the loan. Because I, as an individual, don't have everything it takes to get a loan. But if the corporation owns the property, then the corporation has the asset, and they don't take my credit or anything into consideration. It's the corporation that can get the loan. Well, I buy in, with a limited equity, the buy-in is smaller. Usually the buy-in may be $500 or $1,000, but it's something, or $3,000, but it's some form of cost that is affordable to folks in my income bracket. So we purchase the share, now we're shareholders. So when we leave, we don't get all the equity. The equity is restricted. Maybe you get $50 for every year. That's how it was in the cooperative I lived in.
Tony's battery malfunction, take 2 on limited equity co-ops, and fire away.
All right.
How many do you think there are in DC?
Well, I think there are at least 100 limited equity cooperatives in the District of Columbia. And I say that because a few years back, the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development did a study of limited equity cooperatives in DC. And at that time, and I think that might have been '07 when they had made the study, '06 or '07, sometime then. And we had about 100 limited equity cooperatives, which is quite a large number of cooperatives for a jurisdiction. I think DC might be like third or fourth city with the large number of limited equity cooperatives, or cooperatives period, limited equity housing cooperatives in the country, with New York, of course, being way out there, having far more than any other jurisdiction. And then Chicago has quite a few, but DC has quite a few. One of our concerns with limited equity cooperative, especially around the condomania that we had in starting like in when in the District of Columbia, in Columbia Heights in particular, when like 2001, when the metro opened up, then there was a effort to create condominiums in that area, because there was a intentional push to bring in higher income people into the District of Columbia. And so one of the things that was happening with limited equity cooperative, there were predators going around trying to convince limited equity housing cooperative owners to convert from cooperatives to condominiums. And in fact, we lost some limited equity cooperative, because some of the residents fell for the predators' push. And so folks didn't realize that the bottom of the whole loan, housing loan foreclosure, the bottom was going to fall out. And so a lot of people lost their housing, because they did convert from cooperatives to condominium, a lot of low-income people, and they just could not afford those loans, and then so they're in the boat with a lot of other homeowners who lost their housing. But for the most part, limited equity cooperatives have been pretty strong in DC. One of the challenges that we're facing right this minute is the Housing and Community Development not having enough money in its budget to make these loans available to cooperatives, so that they can purchase their buildings, where the tenant association can purchase their building and convert them to cooperative. The money is not available as it used to be to assist residents in doing that. And then the program that we have, the Housing Production Trust Fund, that we fought for like 2005 or something, to get funded and get a stream of money so that we could continue to help people hold on to their property, has been raided and not funded like it's supposed to be funded. And so therefore a lot of tenant associations that had the opportunity to become cooperative owners have had to partner with developers who want to create rental housing, especially after the bubble fell out of the housing market in '08. Then a lot of developers are saying, hey, let's partner with these tenant associations so we can create rental housing and we can hold on to this property. And tenants have had to do that because tenants have not had the funding that is needed to help them become homeowners, cooperative homeowners. And you know, as a cooperative, the owners, the shareholders, have the same kind of privileges as single family homeowners, in that they can on their income taxes. If you're a limited equity if you're a cooperative owner, period, then you can get a deduction for the amount of money that you pay toward the taxes, property taxes, toward the interest rate. Just like a single-family homeowner, you can get that that benefit as well. And so we don't have as many people being able to do that because the funding is very low for those programs. So that's a problem.
Do you have a favorite story of one of the cooperatives that you organized when funding was better?
Yes. Yes. Let me. One of the one cooperative that I am particularly excited about is not too far from here, actually. It was a public housing development on Southern Avenue and East Capitol in Southeast. A public housing development that had been initially, like in the 70s, slated for homeownership for the tenants. It was one of those properties called the Turnkey 3, which is during the 70s when the federal government was developing public housing. They don't do that anymore. They don't create public housing anymore. But when they were building public housing, there were a program called the Turnkey 3 program, and the tenants who moved into those public housing developments were promised the opportunity to become homeowners after X amount of time. And what was supposed to happen on those Turnkey 3 programs was that part of the rent went toward the purchase price, the down payment. Well, what happened with this property called the Capitol View public housing is a set of townhouses, 100 townhouses. They developed those properties as a Turnkey 3 program, but over the years, the owner, the housing authorities, and other folks private people who were involved, abandoned the tenants. Essentially, they abandoned them throughout the program without letting the tenants know that they were not going to fulfill their promise of the program. And so the tenants for many years, for 20 years, were thinking they were going to become homeowners, and that shortly, because now we're looking at 15, 20 years of living this way, best kept properties in public housing properties anywhere. When the HUD secretaries would talk about the Turnkey 3 program and visited these properties, they would always come to Capitol View because the folks knew they were going to be homeowners, and so they kept the property up to the highest standard, not realizing they had been abandoned, that the whole program had been abandoned. So at one point, some of the residents came to Wish and said, hey, listen, can we get you all's help in trying to find out what's going on? And so I was the organizer with that group. And we, like I said, it was 100 units, and we started organizing. And these were some really dynamic people, and we started going to the federal government, the local government, saying, what's going on? How come people haven't had the opportunity to purchase their property? And in fact, we had to have demonstrations at our council person's home. We had to, in office, we had to go to the federal government. We had to get all kind of publicity to find out, just to get answers for the people who live there. And eventually what happened was the residents were able to force the federal government to sell them the property for $1. And we were able to convert it to a limited equity cooperative. That by this time, this was 20 years later, and these were family properties with 3, 4, 5 bedroom unit townhouses, and the children had grown up, folks had retired, a lot of people had retired, and so, but they still wanted, they wanted to know what was going on, and they wanted the folks to keep their promises because they wanted their property. And so as a result of fighting, we were able to at least convert it to a limited equity cooperative. And so that's where they are now. And so that was very exciting. For me, that was very exciting kind of battle. It took us another 6 or 7 years to get answers and to get the right to purchase. So we were able to, eventually do it. Folks now, they are shareholders. There are a lot of folks, adults who were children there, who were there because it's limited equity, so it's affordable. And it's almost the only place in the District of Columbia where you have 3, 4, and 5 bedroom units, and they're townhouses. And so that was a fantastic victory that I just love the people there now. And they're doing great as owners, as cooperative owners. So that's one that I really like to tell the story of. Yeah, it's a great story. I think so too. There were other cooperatives where folks had to fight to get their rights, and some we've lost, and some that are still there.
So how, as an organizer, did you help? What did you do to help them?
Yeah, well, with the Southern, now they're called Southern Homes and Gardens. That's what they named it. But it was initially, it was the Capitol View Public Housing Development. And what we did in terms of being an organizer and working with residents was, pulling people together, helping them be clear on what their understanding of the promise and what we had seen, and helping them know how to do the research to have all the data that we needed to have, and having regular kind of meetings, and then helping people be able to raise their voices, go to the council and the city council to say, hey, we need your support in helping us do this or do that. And then challenging the city council person, their city council representative, who is H.R. Crawford, who is one of the primary exploiters in the city today. He's one of the primary housing exploiters in the city today, but he was their council member, Ward 7 council member, because they're in Ward 7, not too far from here, as I said. But what was so exciting for me is how the residents themselves, were their own spokespeople, and that's part of what we did. When we went to talk with the people at HUD, they're the one who told their stories. When we went to Eleanor Holmes Norton, they were the ones who told their stories, and they were the ones who making the demand. I was there as the organizer. The organizer do the little behind the scene kind of work, and the organizer's job is to help empower people so that they can speak out and tell their own story and advocate for themselves. And so that was my job. There were times when we were able to, we had to get a school bus because we had folks on the bus, and we went down to the district building or somewhere else to have a demonstration, because sometimes that's how we had to do it. It was good. We were able to convince some of the media people to, in fact, Jonetta Rose Barris was with the Washington Times at that time, was very helpful in helping us publicize what was happening with the residents and how they had been sold out and abandoned, and the government did not follow through on their commitment to people, and then tell them that they were not going to follow through. Yeah.
So you brought that same kind of approach to social change to Empower DC?
Oh, absolutely. In Empower DC, I was one of the founders of the organization that we called Empower DC, and I don't want to say that it grew out of Wish because we shut down Wish, but the two of us, myself and Parisa Naruzi, were on staff at Wish when the board and everybody made a decision to close the organization. Now let's just close this chapter on Wish. Let's just close it down. And so that's what we did. We were on, Parisa and I was the only two people, as I say, on staff at that time. And we were doing, carrying out the mission of Wish. And so we were involved with a lot of projects and had a lot of people involved when the Wish board decided we need to close it down. Well, what Parisa and I said in 2003, we cannot just shut it down because there were no more money or anything. We can't just walk away because we have all these people, depending on us that we're working with. We're community organizers. So we have folks that we've pulled together organizations. We are working with folks to help them raise their voices around issues. I mean, we were very much involved in the work in Ivy City, working with the residents there to prevent them from being forced out by the William administration and then the Fenty administration. So we were very deeply involved in organizing in that part of town. We were deeply involved with organizing in other areas, so we couldn't just say we had to get out of here because there's no money to pay our salary, there's no money to pay rent to have a space. So what we did was say, okay, Wish board, let's close it down. We love you, Wish. Goodbye. Let's create this other organization. Let's create another organization to do very similar work. And so that's how we created Empower DC. We were able to go to some funders and say, hey, listen, please help us continue to work with these folks that we're working with. I mean, it was a whole long period of time when we didn't get paid anything, but we just couldn't go. We had to go and say, hey, give us a sandwich. Or we have to go and get on food stamps and all that kind of stuff to just survive while we try to build this organization called Empower DC. And eventually we were able to get some funding, get some assistance to continue to work with people. So that's how Empower DC came about. And like I say, the mission is very similar in that what our mission with Empower DC is to assist people, low-income people, no-income people, moderate-income people, in speaking out for their rights and being their own advocates, raising their voices. So that's what our mission is to teach people, to assist people in being able to fight for their rights themselves. We love supporters, we love allies, but there's nothing like having people who are directly impacted in speaking up for themselves.
Can you talk more about what you did in Ivy City?
Yes, in Ivy City, the work that Empower DC has been involved in over the years have been two or threefold. One focus on trying to hold on to this Cramel School, which is a historic structure. Used to be one of the only school for African Americans in the city of the District of Columbia. And so it's sitting there right this minute deteriorating. So part of our effort has been to organize the people who love Cramel School and who live in Ivy City. And when I say love Cramel School, folks who may not live there anymore, but went to that school, want to see it exist, want to see it renovated and not demolished or torn down. So just working with pulling that group of people together, and they've been very forceful in their request and demand that it not be torn down. It's the only reason it's still standing, I'm convinced, is because there've been a number of people who have been advocating very strongly. So far we haven't gotten the money that we need to redevelop it into what people want it to be a center for our seniors. They want it to be a employment center. So folks have a list of what they want to see it, and so they're still fighting to get that to happen. And the other areas of our efforts in Ivy City has been to make sure that the developments, they're creating some new housing in Ivy City, and so we've been able to organize residents and other people to say, listen, the housing that you develop in this neighborhood should be for people who are the income level of the people who live in this neighborhood, which is under $30,000. And so that has been very successful. So the nonprofits, essentially the nonprofit that have developed these new housing in the neighborhood, have done it so for people in those income brackets. That's very exciting. And then we were able to work with people, Ivy City residents, Ivy City former residents, to create a story. Even we have a booklet about the story of Ivy City and Mr. Cramell, who was very important to a minister with the Lutherans, I think it is. One religion that was open to African people of African descent. I think it's Lutheran. No, it may be Presbyterian. Don't hold me to it. One of the religions that have always been open to African Americans. And so he was one of the first minister in this religious or group, and he lived and he taught there. And so that's how come the school is named after him. So we were able to create this book on his story, which is his story and the story of Ivy City. And then we did a little work with, there's some subsidized housing in this little tiny neighborhood as well. And so we were able to work with residents in the subsidized housing to convince their owner, the Horning brothers, which are powerful Catholics in this city, the Horning brothers to to stay in the Section 8 program and not get out of the program and just kick people out. So that's the kind of work that we've been doing in Ivy City over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I think. It might even be a little more than that.
Do you think that the bubble and the crash, did you see its effects in people's lives in D.C.?
Well, looking at this, what I call the bubble deflating, the housing bubble deflating in D.C. like in '08. I haven't been too much involved with home ownership, single-family home ownership, so the foreclosure problem I haven't been that close to, but I can say DC, as a result of the tenants' work and advocacy in this city, have one of the protection that says if a tenant lives in a property where that has been foreclosed on, the owners, the bank or whoever financial institution, cannot just come in and put that person out. You cannot just do that in the District of Columbia. And that is a direct result of the work that tenants in this city have been doing. So I know that we've had to increase that, make that awareness to banks and their attorneys and other financial institutions. We've had to kind of organize and make them aware that you cannot just come in because the property is foreclosed and put people out. So that's been an area where we've had to raise the consciousness around the foreclosure problem. Now the other areas where where I have seen the foreclosure or the bubble, housing bubble having an impact have been with people not being able to have the money is not being, as much money not being available. See, with the Housing Production Trust Fund, the way the Housing Production Trust Fund works is that whenever someone purchases a property, then the requotation fee, filing fee, a portion of it go to the Housing Production Trust Fund, and the transfer, another portion of the transfer fee when somebody purchases a home go into the Housing Production Trust Fund. Well, when the bubble happened, there was not as many purchases, home purchases, as had been prior to that. So that little pot of money kind of dried up. So, and that created a real serious problem, because that was the money that we were using to help people purchase their, first right to purchase their housing, to help tenants when they purchase their properties as tenant association to fix them up. So that's where the money came out of the Housing Production Trust Fund pot. And one of the good things about the Housing Production Trust Fund, it was the only pot of funds that targeted people making under $30,000, and because all the other housing production funding is for higher income, like 60 to 80% of the AMI. This is the only pot that specifically said, we're going to target money. Well, a portion of that money must go to people in that income bracket. And so we had a serious problem. We've had a serious problem with getting funding in that. And so that's one of the challenges that we're having right now, right today with that funding.
I hadn't even thought about that. And have you seen a squeeze on rental housing too?
I have not. I have seen, well, let me say, the squeeze that I've seen is not as great. It's always been a squeeze on, meaning that it's never been enough available rental housing for people in the income bracket, especially 30 and under. And so it's kind of hard to say I've seen that increase, because it's always been a serious problem. Now, what I've seen is people, the higher income, and I don't mean high income, I mean higher than, say, the 30,000, but the 60 and below income bracket, there's been a serious kind of problem, because their housing cost has gone up. And so with their housing costs going up, then that means that the people in the lowest income bracket just have to be out there a little longer in terms of having housing available. So in that sense, I've seen a squeeze, but I haven't seen it just been so much worse, because it's always been so bad.
Do we have mandatory inclusionary zoning here?
Oh gosh, we in DC, we have mandatory inclusionary zoning, but it's almost a joke in the sense that we fought really hard. In fact, I saw some zoning people from the zoning board today at the council hearing. But we fought really, really hard in 05, 06, 07 to get the mandatory inclusionary zoning law passed in DC. We worked really hard and we got the law passed. What happened is it's only been about 12 months that we got regulations. The law got regulations, so it couldn't work. So it wasn't available to us during the time when we had the housing boom, because our mayor, Fenty at that time, did not want it. And the mandatory inclusionary zoning requires X number of units to be made available for people in the lower income bracket in any kind of development that's more than say 10 units or more. I think it might be 12 units or more. Any development where there are 12 units or more, then X number of units, small numbers, not a lot, have to be made available for people in the lowest income brackets. We fought very hard for that, and we got it. However, the problem was, it was only like a few months ago, like 24 months, a year ago, that that we were able to get Mr. Fenty administration to create the regulations. So we got the regulations to tell owners how it should work, to make sure that the law works. We got the regulation, and so it is just now been put into effect. In fact, I think maybe 6 months ago, I talked with the person at the Housing and Community Development, which oversees the mandatory inclusionary zoning, and that person promised me that, oh, we're going to make this thing work. We're on it right now, and we're going to make it work. But so there are some people, I understand, who are in some of these properties. So we do have some units. We have been able to get some people in some of the units, but it hasn't, you know. So when we get the regulations, the housing boom, you know, the housing stopped developing, you know, because we have this crisis in housing. So we have it on the book. So when they start developing again, we have to be vigilant. That's how you have to be with any kind of law that benefits low and moderate income people. You have to be vigilant anyway, because the first time that we not pay attention, there's going to be some loophole that says, oh, you can't do it. Somebody's going to try to take it away. Yeah, so yeah, we have it.
Now pause